I stepped out at dawn, coffee steaming, boots untied. The hedge was gone. 14 cypresses. My dad and I planted them the summer before cancer took him. His shaky hands on the spade. My measurements in the dirt. 12 years of shade, privacy, memory. Now jagged stumps, fresh sawdust, chainsaw stink sharp in the frost. They didn't even clean up. Then I saw her. Arms crossed. HOA badge catching the gray light. She looked at the stumps, then at me, one slow smile, the kind that knows exactly what it did. Violation resolved, a nod. You're welcome. She strolled back inside like she'd returned a library book. I looked down at my coffee, still hot, hands steady. Then I smiled too. Rules cut both ways. What would you do if someone destroyed your family's memories overnight? Comment below. And where are you watching from? I need to know I'm not alone in this. Let me back up and tell you who I am because context matters here. My name is Garrett Purcell, 44 years old. I'm a Finnish carpenter, been doing it since I was 19. When my father handed me a nail gun and told me, measure twice, cut once, and never let anybody rush you. That's about the most wisdom one sentence can hold. I work for myself, run a small crew, and about 8 years ago I bought a corner lot in a suburb of Columbus, Ohio. A real neighborhood, the kind where people still wave from driveways. 3 bedrooms, a workshop I built in the backyard, and a front yard I spent real time on. The hedges were my pride. Technically, they were American arborvitae, evergreen, dense, about 4 in of needle and branch texture. You could run your hand across like a living wall. My dad and I planted them together the summer before he got sick. We drove to the nursery in his beat-up GMC, arguing the whole way about spacing. He wanted every 18 in. I wanted 24. We compromised at 21. By the time he passed, those things were already taller than me. And every single spring when the new growth came in that bright, almost electric green, I thought about him. So yeah, the hedges meant something. Now the HOA, our neighborhood, Sycamore Ridge, had an HOA the way most suburban neighborhoods do. Theoretically for keeping things tidy, practically for giving certain personality types a legitimate outlet for their need to control other people. Annual dues, seasonal newsletters, a board of 5 people, most of whom were perfectly reasonable. And then there was Renata Shields. Renata had moved into the house on the corner opposite mine about 3 years before the incident. Late 50s, recently retired from some mid-management position at the county recorder's office, a job that had apparently taught her one thing, above all else. Paperwork is power. She had the kind of face that could smile and issue a threat at the same exact moment. Her yard was immaculate in a way that felt aggressive, like a warning. Mulch so fresh it looked installed. Flowers arranged with a ruler. Within 6 months of joining the HOA board, she was its chair. Within a year, she'd rewritten the Architectural Review Committee guidelines. Within 2, she'd sent formal violation notices to 11 of the 34 homes on our street. My first notice came on a Wednesday in March, certified mail, if you can believe it. The issue, my arborvitae hedges had grown to 6'2" in. The HOA bylaws, Renata had recently amended capped front yard vegetation at 6 feet. I was 2 inches out of compliance. 2 inches. I sent back a polite letter citing the grandfather clause in the original CC and RS, the foundational governing document of the HOA recorded at the county level when the neighborhood was built in 1987, which stated that mature plantings predating any amendment were exempt from new height restrictions. I'd read that document the same weekend I bought the house. Old habit, carpenter's brain. Read the blueprint before you pick up a tool. Renata sent a second notice. This one had a fine attached, $40 a day. I sent a second letter, polite, firm, with a specific page and paragraph number. Renata sent a third notice and CC'd 2 other board members. I called a lawyer friend, just to talk it through. Nothing formal yet, and he confirmed what I already suspected. The grandfather clause was real. It was recorded, and it held water. I wrote one final letter, attached a copy of the relevant CC and R section, and figured that was the end of it. That was October 3rd. On October 8th, I woke up to stumps. The morning light was gray and thin, the kind Ohio gets in early October, when the sky can't quite decide between overcast and fog. I'd stepped outside in my work boots and a flannel, No jacket yet, stubborn habit, and I remember the sound of gravel crunching under my feet as I walked to the truck. Normal morning. Then I turned toward the front of the house. Where the hedge line had been, there were now 14 stumps, each cut at an angle the way someone in a hurry cuts. Not clean, not flush, just gone. Wood chips sprayed across the grass. One of the cuts had been close enough to the ground to nick the irrigation line, and a slow, dark stain of water was spreading across the soil. The tools were gone. Whoever had done this had come before dawn, worked fast, and left nothing behind but damage and sawdust. My stomach dropped, then my jaw tightened. I stood there for a long moment, took a breath, smelled the chainsaw exhaust, two-stroke oil, and cut wood still faint in the air. Whoever did this, it hadn't been more than a few hours ago. I went back inside, poured the coffee I hadn't touched yet, and made 3 calls before 7:30 a.m. First, my neighbor Dwight Okafor across the street, a retired elec. Trician who kept a doorbell camera and had the situational awareness of a man who'd spent 30 years on job sites where things go wrong fast. Second, my lawyer friend Marcus Webb, who picked up on the second ring because that's the kind of person he is. Third, the Columbus Police non-emergency line because whatever this was, it was going in the record today. Dwight's camera had caught it. A licensed tree service truck, logo on the door, everything. And Renata Shield standing in the driveway in a barn coat, pointing and directing at 4:47 a.m. like she was staging a furniture delivery. Let that sink in. She hired a licensed company to destroy my property before sunrise. The responding officer, a young guy, professional, clearly had seen stranger things, took my statement, reviewed the photo Dwight forwarded from his phone, and wrote it up as criminal mischief, potential destruction of private property. Not an arrest, not yet, but a report number and a case. Meanwhile, Marcus was already talking faster than I could follow. Okay, here's what you do right now. Document everything. Every stump, every chip, every inch of damaged irrigation. Photograph, video, time-stamped. Then we're going to get an arborist out there to assess replacement value because mature arborvitae at 6 feet don't come cheap, and the law does not care that she had a beef with you. Property damage is property damage. I want to explain something important here because this is where a lot of people, normal, reasonable people who've never been in a legal dispute, make their first mistake. They react. They go knock on the neighbor's door. They post on Facebook. They let their anger do the talking. And the moment you do that, you've handed the other side ammunition. I did not knock on Ranada's door. I did not post on Facebook. I went to the hardware store, bought marking flags, and spent the next 2 hours documenting. Gee, every stump like a crime scene, because that's exactly what it was. I hired an arborist, found one through the Ohio Nursery and Landscape Association, which matters for credibility, and she came out that same afternoon. Her assessment 14 arborite at approximately 12 years maturity. Replacement value at $340 per tree installed. Total $4,760 plus irrigation repair, $280 plus the soil compaction from the truck driving onto my lawn. Another $150 in sod repair. Grand total documented damage, $5,190. Here's the first thing you need to know about property damage law. In most states, including Ohio, when someone destroys living plants on your property, damages are calculated at replacement value, meaning what it costs to replant the equivalent, not the nursery tag price on a baby tree, the full installed mature equivalent value. That number matters. I submitted all of it. The police report, the arborist's assessment, the irrigation invoice, Dwight's doorbell footage to Marcus by end of day. Then I went and checked the HOA bylaws. Not for the first time, but now with a different question. Not can she do this, but how did she think she could get away with it? And that's when I found the first crack. The HOA's Architectural Review Committee, Renata's committee, the one she'd personally rewritten the rules for, required a formal written order from the full 5-member board before any enforcement action involving physical alteration of a property. Not just the chair, the full board. She'd acted alone, and she'd done it at 4:47 in the morning, which told me something else. She knew it. You'd think that discovery, the illegal solo action, the footage, the filed police report would be enough to slow Renata down. You'd think at minimum she'd go quiet for a while. Lawyer up, maybe reconsider. She sent me a notice the next day. This one was on HOA letterhead signed only by her, and I informed me that I had 30 days to remove the remaining stumps and debris from the affected area and plant compliant low-growth ground cover not to exceed 2 feet in height. She attached a suggested plant list. She'd highlighted creeping phlox. I actually laughed. Not a happy laugh, more like the laugh you do when something is so bold it transcends normal human comprehension. Marcus's response was surgical. He filed a formal demand letter to the full HOA board. Not to Renata, to all 5 members, citing the procedural violation, the police report, the documented property damage, and a specific Ohio statute. OC Section 5312, which governs planned community associations and requires that enforcement actions follow established procedures or face liability. The letter made clear that Renata had acted outside her authority, that the HOA as an entity could share in that liability if they ratified her action, and that we expected a response within 10 business days. 2 board members, a retired teacher named Harriet Fulloff, and a guy named Douglas Putt, who'd apparently been quietly fed up with Renata for a year, called me within 48 hours separately. Both said almost the same thing. We didn't know she was doing that. Told me the board wasn't monolithic. Renata had made enemies inside her own organization. Here's the second legal nugget you should know. OA board members can be held personally liable for actions they authorize, but also in some states for actions they ratify after the fact without objection. The moment Marcus's letter hit their inboxes, every board member had a choice: distance themselves from Renata or absorb the exposure. Harriet and Douglas made their choice fast, but Renata, she escalated. She began a whisper campaign. I know this because 3 different neighbors told me about it independently, which is how you know a whisper campaign is real when it gets doused to you from too many directions to be coincidence. The story, as best as I can piece it together, went something like this. Garrett has been violating HOA rules for years. The hedges were actually a safety issue, blocking sight lines near the corner, which for the record they were not. They were on the interior side of my lot, not the street corner. And Garrett had been hostile and threatening in his communications. Hostile, threatening, my certified letters with cited paragraph numbers. She also apparently told at least 2 neighbors that she had documentation of additional violations on my property. I had no idea what that meant. I'm a finished carpenter. My property is the tidiest on the block, but the implication was clear. She was building a file or pretending to. I found out about the whisper campaign on a Saturday afternoon when my neighbor Pet Drinine came over specifically to warn me. Pet is in her 60s, has lived on our street for 20 years, and has the straightforward honesty of someone who has simply outlasted enough drama to not bother sugarcoating it. She stood on my porch, smelled the coffee I just made. I offered her a cup. She declined but appreciated it, and said she's telling people you threatened her in writing. I don't believe it, but you should know. I thanked Pet. I went inside. I printed every single letter I'd ever sent Renata, every response, every certified receipt, and put them in a binder. Then I forwarded the whole chain to Marcus. His response, 1 sentence. This is now a defamation exposure on top of everything else. What I did next, though, this is where I started moving from defense to offense. I requested formally and in writing the complete HOA financial records for the past 3 years. Under Ohio law, members of a homeowners association are entitled to inspect the association's financial records upon written request. I had every right to those documents. I made the request on a Tuesday. By Friday, Renata had hired her own attorney. Now we were getting somewhere, because here's what I suspected, and what I was about to confirm was that a person who reacts to a routine financial records request by immediately hiring a lawyer isn't protecting the HOA, she's protecting herself. The financial records came in late, incomplete, and in a format clearly designed to be as difficult to read as possible. Columns misaligned, line items labeled with codes instead of descriptions. 47 pages of what should have been a straightforward ledger for a neighborhood of 34 homes collecting about $1,800 a year per household. I'm a carpenter. I'm not an accountant, but I know what a bill of materials looks like. I know how to read a line item and ask, does this make sense? One entry stood out immediately. Under grounds maintenance Q3, there was a charge for $3,200 to a company called Arbor and Edge LLC. I recognized that name. It was the tree service on the truck in Dwight's doorbell footage, the one Renata had directed at 4:47 a.m. to cut down my hedges. So, a licensed tree service had destroyed my private property at the direction of the HOA chair, who acted without board authorization, and the HOA had paid for it out of member dues, out of my dues. I want you to feel the texture of that for a second. I paid approximately $1,800 a year to this HOA. Some portion of that money had been used to pay a contractor to destroy my own property. I took the records to Marcus. He took them to a forensic accountant, a friend of his who does this kind of work for small civil cases, and we spent about a week going through everything carefully. What emerged was an embezzlement. Exactly, it was murkier, and in some ways worse. Several grounds maintenance charges appeared to have been authorized solely by Renata, without the dual signature. Requirement the bylaws specified for expenditures over $500. A few vendors appeared to have personal connections to Renata. One was a landscaping company co-owned by her nephew according to the county business registry, which is public record, and took Marcus about 15 minutes to find. Here's the third legal financial thing you should remember. In a homeowners association, fiduciary duty is real, and it is enforceable. Board members owe a duty to act in the interests of the membership, not their own. Approving payments to family members' companies without disclosure or competitive bidding is a textbook breach of that duty, and in Ohio it can expose the responsible party to civil liability, and in egregious cases criminal referral. We weren't quite at criminal yet, but we were building something. Meanwhile, the Whisper campaign had apparently upgraded to direct pressure. Renata visited in person 3 of my closer neighbors, Pet, Dwight, a younger couple at the end of the block named the Furls. She told each of them in slightly different words that she was concerned about the direction Garrett is taking the community, that he was making things difficult for everyone, and that perhaps people should think carefully before they supported any action against the board. That last part, think carefully, lands differently when the person saying it is the one who can issue violation notices. It's not a legal threat, it's a social threat, and it's sophisticated. What Renata didn't know, couldn't know, because she'd underestimated every single person she'd tried to manipulate, was that Dwight had recorded their conversation on his phone. Ohio is a one-party consent state for audio recording, meaning only one person in the conversation needs to consent. Dwight consented. He texted me the audio file that evening. I listened to it twice, sent it to Marcus. Then I made a pot of chili, the kind that simmers for 3 hours, fills the whole house with cumin and dark chili pepper, and let myself feel for the first time in weeks like the wind had shifted. I also made a decision that night. I'd been patient, I'd documented, I'd lawyered up, I'd played it straight and clean. All of that had been necessary. But Renata wasn't going to stop. She was going to keep escalating until someone physically stopped her, or until the political will of the neighborhood crystallized around something visible, something undeniable. I needed to give people something to rally around, and I needed to make sure that the next move Renata made, whatever it was, happened in full public view. I started drawing plans, not for a lawsuit, not for a letter, for a wall. This is where things went from neighbor dispute to I cannot believe this is real life. While Marcus was working through the financial records and preparing a formal complaint to the Ohio Department of Commerce, which oversees certain HOA governance issues, he did something I hadn't thought to ask him to do. He pulled the original title chain on my property, just to be thorough. What he found was this. My lot being a corner lot had a specific property survey on record, with Franklin County dating to 1986, 1 year before the HOA was even incorporated. That survey defined the precise boundaries of my lot, including a notation that the northwest landscape corridor, which is a fancy way of saying the strip of my yard where the hedges had grown, was designated in the original plat as a private easement buffer. Not just my yard, a designated buffer. And here's what that meant legally. That strip had been specifically noted in the original subdivision plat, the foundational document that predates the HOA, predates the CC and RS, predates the CC and RS, predates everything Renata had ever amended as a vegetative screen intended to provide acoustic, and visual separation between the corner lot and the adjacent street. The original developer had put it there on purpose. It was on the survey. It was in the county records. The HOA had not just violated their own bylaws when Renata cut my hedges. They had potentially interfered with a recorded plat designation. Marcus explained this to me over the phone, and I sat in my truck in my own driveway for a full minute just letting it land. This wasn't a technicality. This wasn't a fine print trick. This was bedrock. The kind of thing that when you bring it into a courtroom makes the other side's attorney go very still and ask for a recess. Here's what you need to understand about recorded plat designations. They are superior to OA authority. An HOA can make rules. An HOA can amend rules. An HOA cannot retroactively alter what a county recorded survey says about land use. The county surveyor's office, not the HOA, is the final authority on that document, and that document said my hedgine wasn't just allowed, it was functionally required. Takeaway: always pull your original plat survey. Most homeowners never do. It's public record. It costs nothing to obtain from your county recorder, and it can contain protections for your property that your deed and your HOA documents don't even mention. But here's what really knocked me sideways. When Marcus cross-referenced the plat designation with the HOA's own insurance policy, which he'd gotten a copy of through the records request, he found something specific. The policy had a rider added 2 years ago that excluded coverage for claims arising from unauthorized enforcement actions by individual board members. Standard language for HOA policies apparently added after some legal reform in the early 2020s. 2 years ago, right around when Renata took over as chair, the HOA's insurer had anticipated the possibility of a rogue board member. They'd specifically excluded it, which meant if a civil suit proceeded, Renata wouldn't be shielded by the HOA's umbrella. She'd be personally exposed. I called Marcus back and said, "How long before she figures this out?" He said, "If she hasn't already, soon." I said, "Then we need to move." He said, "What do you have in mind?" I said, "How do you feel about cinder blocks?" There was a pause. Then Marcus laughed. "The real kind, not the lawyer kind." "Not the lawyer kind. Tell me everything," he said. "Here's the thing about cinder blocks. They're boring. They're utilitarian. They smell like dust and wet aggregate when you stack them fresh. They're the opposite of elegant. And under the right circumstances, they are the most glorious building material in the world. Permit me to explain the plan. Ohio's Residential Fence and Wall Code, specifically the Columbus City Ordinance. Residential Fence and Wall Code, specifically the Columbus City Ordinance, Chapter 3321 of the Zoning Code, allows a property owner to construct a solid masonry wall on their own property, up to 6 feet in height in a residential district without an engineering variance, provided it meets setback requirements and doesn't obstruct traffic sight lines at a street intersection. My corner lot had a clear setback from the actual street corner. The designated buffer easement ran along the interior lot line, not the street, which kept it well outside any sightline concern. Translation: I could build a 6-foot cinder block wall entirely on my own property, by permit legally without anyone's permission. I applied for the permit the morning after my call with Marcus. Building permits in Columbus are filed online, reviewed administratively, and for a straightforward residential masonry fence application, typically approved in 7 to 10 business days. I checked the box for replacement of existing landscape screening, accurate since that's exactly what this was. Then I started calling in favors. My friend, an occasional subcontractor, Ray Samsky, is a masonry guy, has been for 30 years, built chimneys, retaining walls, fireplaces, commercial facades. When I explained the project, 6 feet of cinder block, approximately 85 linear feet along the lot line where the hedges had been, he was quiet for a moment, then said, "You want to cap it or leave it raw?" I said, "Raw. I want it to look like a fortress." Ray said, "I can do that." The material cost roughly $2.40, 40 cents per standard 8x8x6 cinder block. For 85 linear feet at 6 feet high, we'd need approximately 900 to 950 blocks, plus mortar, footings, and rebar for structural integrity. Total material budget around $3,800. Labor, since Rai owed me from a kitchen cabinet job I'd done his sister at cost, we'd call it even. Here's the financial mechanic you should write down. In my civil claim against Renata and potentially the HOA, I was seeking $5,190 in documented damages. The wall was going to cost me approximately $3,800 in materials. Those were two separate tracks. The damages claim was Marcus's lane. The wall was mine. And here's why that mattered. The wall was going on my property, built by permit, whether the lawsuit resolved in my favor or not. It couldn't be ordered removed without a separate legal challenge that would require the HOA to explain in a courtroom why they'd cut down the original vegetation in the first place. Ranatata had created a vacancy. I was filling it with something she couldn't touch. Meanwhile, I'd been talking to neighbors, not organizing in any dramatic way, just coffee on the porch, conversations over back fences, the normal texture of neighborhood life. What I found was a reservoir of exhaustion. Harriet Volov, the board member who'd called me right away, turned out to have a full folder of procedural objections she'd been quietly documenting for 18 months. Douglas Puitt had received a notice about his basketball hoop in his own driveway, regulation height, that Renata had tried to classify as a permanent structure. The ferals at the end of the block had been fined for a garden bed that extended for and past an arbitrary boundary Renata had measured herself. People were tired. They just needed a moment to coalesce around. The wall was going to be that moment, but it needed one more element to work the way I was picturing it. I contacted the local NBC affiliate, specifically a reporter named Candace Ellsworth, who'd done a piece about HOA overreach 6 months earlier that had gotten a lot of traction online. I didn't pitch her a story. I just sent an email with the police report number, the arborist assessment, the doorbell camera timestamp, and the plat survey notation. Subject line for your files if useful. She responded within 2 hours. Then I went to the hardware store. Rai met me there. We stood in the masonry aisle under fluorescent lights, both of us, in work boots, a flatbed cart between us, and we started counting blocks. The permit came through on day 9. We broke ground on a Saturday. Renata noticed the permit sign the same morning we posted it. I know because she was out there with her phone photographing it before Ray's truck was even fully unloaded. A permit sign, for those who haven't had the pleasure. It's a yellow placard you're required to post visibly at the work site. Ours said residential masonry fence permit number CB202409847. Completely routine, completely legal. Renata photographed it like it was evidence at a crime scene. By noon, she'd filed a challenge with the Columbus Department of Building and Zoning. I know this because the department called me to inform me, standard procedure, when a permit is formally contested, and the reviewing administrator told me with the careful neutrality of someone who has seen everything that the challenge had been submitted, and that someone would need to conduct an on-site review. The reviewer came out Tuesday. He was a compact, serious man named Gerald, who wore a city-issued windbreaker and carried a clipboard with the energy of someone who had decided long ago that his job was to apply the rules and nothing else. He measured my setbacks. He checked the sightline calculations. He reviewed the plat survey which I'd printed and had ready along with the original buffer easement notation highlighted in yellow. Gerald looked at the plat notation, looked at me, looked at the measuring tape, made some notes, said without any particular drama, "Everything looks in order. Permit stands." He was back in his car within 20 minutes. Renata was watching from her driveway the entire time. I didn't look at her. I went back to work. That afternoon, she sent a letter, not certified, just dropped in my mailbox, informing me that the HOA was formally reviewing whether the proposed wall violated the community aesthetic standards outlined in the CCNRs. This was a real provision. The CCNRs did contain an aesthetic standards clause, which allowed the board to object to structures it deemed inconsistent with neighborhood character. It required a formal vote of at least 3 of the 5 board members. She had 2 herself, and a man named Phil Cortland, who'd been on the board for years and reliably voted however Renata wanted. I suspected she'd had him on speed dial since the permit went up, but Harriet Vuloff and Douglas Puitt were the other 2. I'd spoken with both of them, and when I reached out to ask whether they'd received any request for an aesthetic standards vote, Harriet said flatly, "She hasn't called me, and even if she did, I'd vote no." That was 3-2 minimum. The vote, if it ever happened, would fail. But Renata wasn't done maneuvering. Her attorney, a guy named Thaddeus Scragg, whose firm did a lot of HOA work around central Ohio, sent Marcus a letter arguing that the plat easement I'd cited was a public easement, not a private one, meaning I had no exclusive right to maintain vegetation there. It was a creative argument. Wrong but creative. Marcus spent one evening writing a 12-page response that I won't bore you with here, but the conclusion was simple. The 1986 survey notation specifically said, private buffer, benefit of lot 14, and I was lot 14. I want to pause here and give credit where it's due. Thaddeus Gregg wasn't a villain. He was doing his job. His client was. There's a difference. The real escalation came from an unexpected direction. One of my crew, a young guy named Brett, who does trim work for me and has no filter whatsoever, posted a photo on his personal Instagram. Just a job site photo. Stacks of cinder blocks, Ray in the background, my house visible. Caption: big week, friend. Finally building his fortress. Oh, he tagged me. I have maybe 200 followers. By Wednesday, it had been shared 4,000 times. The phrase a fortress apparently had legs I hadn't anticipated. People in the comments were losing their minds in the best possible way. The story hadn't even broken in the news yet, and already strangers were posting their own HOA horror stories, tagging their friends, asking for updates. Renata's attorney sent a letter asking me to take the post down, citing reputational harm. Brett didn't even have a lawyer. He just replied to the letter with a screenshot of his post, and the words First Amendment. He's not technically wrong, but I did gently suggest he run any future responses by Marcus first. The wall was about 40% done. We had maybe 4 days of work left, and Candace Ellsworth from the NBC affiliate had just confirmed she was coming Friday. The week before we finished the wall was the week Renata made her biggest mistakes. Not one big move, a series of smaller ones, each revealing a little more desperation, each one documented. On Monday, she filed a formal defamation complaint against Brett with the HOA, which has no jurisdiction over a non-member posting on social media, but paperwork is paperwork, and she was generating it. Marcus added it to the file. The file was getting thick. On Tuesday, she approached 3 of the 4 landscaping vendors in the county who regularly did work in our neighborhood and told them, according to 2 of the vendors who called me afterward, that I was in litigation and difficult to work with, implying they shouldn't take jobs from me. One of the vendors was a guy named Hector Ballard, who I'd sent probably $40,000 in referrals to over the years when clients asked for landscaping recommendations after I did their trim work. Hector was not pleased. He called me personally, gave me a full account of what she'd said, and asked if I wanted it in writing. I said, yes, I want you to understand what Renata had just done legally. She'd made false statements about my professional conduct to my business contacts with the intent to damage my professional relationships. That's not just social drama. That's torch interference. In Ohio, a claim of tortious interference with a business relationship requires showing that the defendant took improper actions to interfere with existing or prospective relationships. Renata had just handed Marcus another cause of action with a witness. Takeaway: when someone is losing a legal fight, they often start fighting in other arenas. Document everything in those arenas, too. On Wednesday, someone, we never proved it was Renata, but the timing was notable, submitted an anonymous complaint to the city claiming my construction site had an improperly stored materials hazard. A city inspector came out, found nothing. The cinder blocks were stacked on pallets, covered entirely on my property. The inspector apologized for wasting my time and left. But here's what that anonymous complaint did that its sender hadn't anticipated. It created a city record of an inspection that found 0 violations. In fact, the inspector's report noted that the work site was well organized and in full compliance. That report was now a city document, time-stamped, publicly accessible. You can't buy that kind of documentation. On Thursday evening, I got a call from Candace Ellsworth. She'd been doing her own digging since I sent her those initial documents. She'd found the county business registry link to the landscaping company and Renata's nephew. She'd talked to Harriet Volkov, who had agreed to speak on the record. She'd pulled the full board meeting minutes from the past 2 years, also public record, and identified 3 instances where Renata had spent association funds without the required dual signature. Candace asked if I was willing to sit for an interview. I said yes, but I asked her to wait until after Friday. I wanted the wall to be finished first. She asked why. I said because the visual matters and I want you to see it complete. There was a pause on the line. Then she said, "You've thought about this. I told her my father taught me. Measured twice, cut once. Don't let anybody rush you. Friday morning came gray and cool again, same light as that first terrible October morning 6 weeks earlier, and I noticed it, the symmetry of it. The way the season closes circles whether you're ready or not. Ray and I were on site by 7 a.m. The last course of blocks went up by 10 o'clock. We pointed the joints, cleaned the faces, stepped back. 6 feet of cinder block, 87 linear feet, straight, clean, solid as a courthouse wall. The raw gray of it caught the flat October light and gave it back without apology. It was beautiful in the way the arborvitae had been beautiful. It was beautiful the way a closed account is beautiful. The way a locked door is beautiful, the way a locked door is beautiful, the way something permanent and immovable, and yours is beautiful. I thought about my dad. I thought about the smell of fresh arborvitae in spring, that electric green. I thought we'll plant climbing roses on the inside. They'll come over the top in June and soften it. He would have liked that, but not yet. First Friday afternoon I texted Candace, "Wall's done. Come get your visual." She arrived with the camera crew at 2 p.m. Here's what the camera crew saw when they pulled up. A 6-foot cinder block wall running the full length of my corner lot's northwest side. The exact line where the arborvitae had stood, solid, gray, unapologetic. On the street-facing side, I'd moored it in a single rectangular stone plaque about 12 in wide that Rye had helped me cut from a piece of Ohio limestone engraved on it in clean Roman capitals. Lot 14, private buffer easement, established 1986. That plaque cost me $60 and 12 minutes of engraving time at a monument shop in Hilliard. I've been planning it since the day Marcus showed me the plat survey. Candace Ellsworth looked at the plaque for a long moment, then at me, then back at the plaque. Then she said quietly, "That's going in the piece." The interview happened right there in front of the wall. I told the story, not the whole thing, just the shape of it. The hedges my father and I planted, the notices, the 4:47 a.m. chainsaw, the documented damage, the permit, the plat, the wall. I kept my voice even. I didn't editorialize about Renata by name. I let the documents do that. I referred to her as the board chair, which is accurate and happens to be devastating when accompanied by footage of a doorbell camera timestamp. Dwight had agreed to be interviewed. He stood in his driveway across the street, a calm man in a fleece vest, and said exactly 4 sentences on camera. "I have a doorbell camera. It recorded the truck and the board chair at 4:47 in the morning. I gave the footage to the police. That's everything I know." Harriet Boloff did a phone interview that Candace recorded. Harriet said on record that she had not been consulted about the enforcement action, that she had documented her procedural objections in board meeting notes, and that she believed the financial authorizations in question required a formal audit. The segment was not aired Friday. Candace was thorough. She fact-checked. She gave Renata's attorney a chance to respond. That is, Greg declined, which is the right legal call, and also terrible optics. And she waited for one additional development. That development came the following Tuesday at the monthly HOA general meeting. I attended. So did 11 of the 34 homeowners on our street. More than had attended any meeting in 5 years, according to the sign-in logs, which Harriet helpfully read aloud at the start of the meeting. Renata's attorney had advised her not to come. Apparently, she didn't show. Phil Cortland, her loyal co-voter, arrived, looked at the room, and sat down quietly at the far end of the table. Marcus had prepared a motion, proper parliamentary format, seconded by Douglas Pute, fully in order, calling for 3 things. First, a forensic audit of the HOA's financials for the past 3 years. Second, a censure of the board chair for unauthorized enforcement action. Third, a vote to approve my insurance claim against the HOA for the documented property damage of $5,190. All 3 passed. 4-1. Phil Cortland voted yes on all 3. I don't know what changed his mind, and I didn't ask. Renata received formal notice of the censure in the financial audit that same evening by certified mail, her preferred medium. The NBC segment ran Thursday. By Saturday, it had been picked up by the Columbus Dispatch, then by 2 national news aggregators that cover HOA stories. The doorbell footage ran in the segment. Dwight's camera. 4:47 a.m. the tree service truck, the barn coat, the pointing. I watched it in my kitchen with a cup of coffee. The wall was visible in the background of the outdoor interview shot, solid and gray and permanent. The limestone plaque catching the afternoon light, just right. My phone ran notifications for 3 days straight. Renata resigned from the board 9 days after the segment aired. Thaddeus Gregg filed a notice of withdrawal from representation shortly after. The forensic audit identified $11,400 in improperly authorized expenditures over 2 years, including the $3,200 payment to Arbor and Edge, LLC, for the removal of my hedges. The Franklin County Prosecutor's Office reviewed the audit findings. As of this recording, that review is ongoing. The HOA, now operating under an emergency 3-person board, led by Harriet Volkoff, paid my claim, the full $5,190, by check within 30 days. I deposited it. Then I went to the nursery. It's May now and the climbing roses are in. I planted 7 of them on the interior side of the wall, a heritage variety called 4th of July. Red and white striped clusters of blooms that will grow 6, 8, 10 feet if you let them. The canes are already reaching. By next summer, they'll be coming over the top, cascading down the face of the gray block, and the effect is going to be something my father would have appreciated. Serious structure underneath, wildness on top, permanence and bloom. I kept 2 of the original arboretus stumps ground down, but not removed. I turned them into small, raised planters. My daughter, she's 9, she helped me fill them with soil, planted marigolds. They came up orange and gold, and they look ridiculous next to all that gray stone, and they're perfect. Here's where the story ends up practically. The civil claim settled. Not in court. Renata's personal insurance carrier reached out to Marcus about 4 weeks after the TV segment ran, and we arrived at a settlement figure that I'm not allowed to disclose, but that more than covered the full cost of the wall, the roses, the legal fees, and the emotional toll of 6 weeks of having someone try to systematically dismantle everything I'd built, literally and figuratively. The settlement included a confidentiality clause on Renata's side, not mine, meaning I can tell this story and I am. The HOA under Harriet's interim leadership has done 3 things that matter. First, they hired a licensed property management company to handle financials and enforcement so that no single board member can ever again unilaterally authorize payments or enforcement actions. This is called segregation of duties, and it's standard practice for any organization handling pooled money. The fact that it wasn't in place before is a governance failure that nobody wants to repeat. Second, they amended the CC and RS to explicitly require dual board members sign-off and written member notification before any enforcement action involving physical alteration of private property. That language is now recorded at the county level. It lives in the same document stack as my 1986 plat survey. Third, and this one I'm genuinely proud of, the board voted to establish the Sycamore Ridge Community Beautification Fund. Seed money, $3,000 from the recovered improperly spent dues, matched $4 by voluntary contributions from 12 households, including mine. The fund is administered by a committee of 3 residents, elected, not appointed, and it pays for neighborhood tree plantings every spring, coordinated with the Franklin County Soil and Water Conservation District. Native species, things, tent, hat belong here. This past April, we planted 8 Ohio Buckeye saplings along the common greenway at the end of the street. They're small now, barely knee-high, bendy in the wind, the leaves that bright fresh green of new growth. In 12 years, there'll be significant trees. In 12 years, there'll be significant trees. In 20, there'll be something. My dad would have wanted to argue about spacing. Here's what I want you to take away from this story. Not the drama, not the legal victory, not the footage of a barn coat at 4:47 in the morning, but the actual usable knowledge. Pull your plat survey. It's free from your county recorder. Read it before you need it. Know your state's HOA statute. Every state has one. Yours governs what your board can and cannot do. Document everything in writing always. Not because you're planning to sue, because documentation is how you stay calm when things get ugly. It externalizes the chaos. It gives you somewhere to put it. And if someone takes something from you, whether it's a hedgin or a principle or a piece of your past, don't just grieve it. Build something better in its place. Build it to code. Build it with a permit. Build it so it lasts. I do this for a living.